I want to talk about a kind of loneliness that nobody talks about. Not the loneliness of being alone, not the loneliness of loss, though I know that one too. The other kind, the kind that is harder to name and harder to admit. The loneliness of being in a room full of people who love you and feeling quietly, underneath the warmth of all that love, completely alone. I'm 88 years old. I have been loved my entire life by a wife, by children, by friends who have known me for decades, by people who would, without question, do anything for me. And the loneliest moment of my life was not when I was alone. It was at my own 70th birthday party, sitting at the head of a table full of every person I had ever loved, watching them laugh and talk and raise their glasses, and feeling, as clearly as I have ever felt anything, that not one of them knew who I actually was. I'm not saying they didn't love me. They did. They do. I am saying that love and being known are not the same thing, and I had spent 60 years confusing them, accepting love as a substitute for the thing I actually needed, which was to be seen, not admired, not appreciated, seen. Stay with me. I think this is something you may have felt, and I think it may be useful to finally put words around it. Section 1. The room where it happened. Let me tell you about that room. My wife had organized the party, 18 months of quiet planning that she had kept almost entirely secret. The restaurant was one we had gone to on our first anniversary. She had reserved the private room in the back, the one with the low lighting and the round tables that make everyone feel equally important. There were 34 people there, my wife, my 3 children and their families, my oldest friends, men and women I had known since my 20s, my brother who had flown in from across the country, my wife's family who had always treated me like one of their own. The room was full of love. I want to be absolutely clear about that. There was no shortage of love in that room. It was present in every face, every gesture, every toast. My oldest friend stood up and gave a speech about the man I was. He was eloquent and warm, and the things he said were true. They were accurate descriptions of things I had done, qualities I had shown, moments in our friendship that had mattered. He had clearly thought about it for weeks, and as I listened, as the room laughed and nodded and raised their glasses, I had a thought I have never spoken aloud until now. I thought, he is describing someone I recognize, but he is not describing me. Not because he was wrong, he was right about all of it. But he was describing the version of me that I had shown him, the curated version, the capable, reliable, composed version, the version that had been carefully constructed and consistently maintained for 40 years. He had never seen past that version, not once, and I had never let him. The loneliness I felt in that room was not their failure, it was the harvest of my own lifelong withholding. I had spent 60 years being carefully known, known in the way I had chosen to be known, and in doing so had made genuine knowing impossible. The party was a celebration of a performance, and I was the only one in the room who knew it. Section 2. The 6 layers of this loneliness. Layer 1. The loneliness of the curated self, when you have been too careful for too long. The first layer is the one I described at my birthday party. The loneliness that comes from having spent so long presenting a particular version of yourself that the people around you have fallen in love with that version, and you know privately that you are more complicated than what they love. It is not dishonesty, exactly. The version you show is real. It is a real part of you, but it is the edited part, the approved part, the part that has been found acceptable and has therefore been leaned into, amplified, and repeated. While the rest, the uncertain parts, the contradictory parts, the parts you are ashamed of or confused by or not sure how to present, those parts have been living in the back room for so long they have started to feel like strangers. The paradox: the more carefully you curate yourself for love, the more isolated the real self becomes. You are loved, loudly, warmly, genuinely, and the thing being loved is not quite you. You are alone in the middle of your own celebration. I was the most known-looking person in that room. I was also, in the way that mattered most, the least known. Because I had made myself knowable only at the surface, and the surface was very well maintained. Layer 2. the loneliness of unasked questions, when people love you without being curious about you. The second layer is quieter, and I think it is the one most people in long relationships will recognize. It is the loneliness of being with someone who loves you, completely, sincerely loves you, but has stopped being curious about you. Who knows your preferences and your habits and your history? Who can finish your sentences and predict your reactions and order for you at restaurants? Who loves you fully and knows you thoroughly in the way that time and proximity produce, and who has not asked you a real question, a question that assumed you might surprise them, in years. My wife and I were married for 51 years. She knew me better than anyone on earth. She knew my moods before I named them. She knew which silences were peaceful and which were troubled. She loved me with a completeness that I have never doubted for a single day. And somewhere in our 40s, I could not tell you the exact year, the question stopped. Not because she stopped caring, because she believed she already knew, and mostly she did. But the parts of me that were still becoming, the parts that were still uncertain, still changing, still arriving, those parts had no one to arrive for. Because the assumption of full knowledge had quietly closed the door to new discovery. Being fully known is not the same as being known fully. The first means someone has complete information about who you were. The second means someone is still curious about who you are becoming. Long love tends toward the first. What we need, all of us at every age, is the second. Layer 3. The loneliness of performing. Okay. The role that gets more exhausting every year. The third layer is the one nobody admits at dinner parties. The loneliness of being the person who is fine, the reliable one, the together one, the one other people bring their problems to because they trust that you can hold it. The one who, when asked how they are, always has a version of "good thank you" ready to deliver. I was that person for most of my adult life, and it is an honored role. People genuinely needed it. But inside it, inside the performance of okay, there is a particular kind of aloneness. Because performing okay means that when you are not okay, which everyone is regularly for their entire lives, you have no natural place to put it. You have spent so long being the safe place for others that you have no safe place yourself. The person who is always fine becomes, over decades, invisible in a specific way. Not invisible to love, they are often the most loved person in the room. Invisible to care. Nobody thinks to ask them the real question because they have never given anyone reason to. The performance has been too convincing. I sat with a pain, a real, serious private pain, for 3 years in my 60s, a crisis of meaning, a quiet despair about choices I had made and roads I had not taken. Nobody knew, not because they wouldn't have cared, they would have cared enormously, because I had been performing okay for so long that I had forgotten how to not perform it. The role had become the self, and the self had no one. Layer 4. The loneliness of untranslatable experience. What you carry that has no words in the shared language. The fourth layer is one that comes specifically with age, though I think younger people feel versions of it too. It is the loneliness of experience that cannot be translated. As you get older, you accumulate things that the people around you, however much they love you, simply cannot understand from the inside. The specific texture of watching your parents decline and disappear. The particular quality of a grief that is 20 years old and still sometimes ambushes you in the produce aisle of a grocery store. The feeling of being in a body that is changing in ways nobody your age has told you to expect. The strange experience of watching the world become unrecognizable while you remain, in your interior, essentially the person you have always been. These things do not translate easily. When you try to share them, the people who love you listen with complete attention and genuine care, and respond with something that is slightly adjacent to what you said, because they are translating from the outside, and some experiences can only be understood from the inside. This loneliness is not a failure of love or of communication. It is the irreducible privacy of individual experience. Every person who has ever lived has carried things that could not be fully given to another. The loneliness of the untranslatable is the loneliness of being a self, any self, at any age. Knowing this does not dissolve it, but knowing it makes it possible to carry without resentment. Layer 5. The loneliness of grown into roles. When the way they see you stopped keeping up with who you became. The fifth layer is one that takes decades to notice. It is the loneliness of having grown beyond the version of yourself that the people who love you first fell in love with. The people who have known you longest carry the earliest image of you. Your children carry the parent you were when they were young. Your oldest friends carry the person you were at 30. Your siblings carry the child you were before you had any real self to show the world. And as you change, as you grow, learn, complicate, revise, the image they carry does not always update in step with the person. You become more than the role. The role remains. You sit inside it like a suit that no longer fits, and the conversation happens with the suit rather than the person wearing it. My children even now relate to me in some ways as the father I was when they were teenagers. That father was real, but he was also 40 years ago. The person I have become in those 40 years, the changes, the doubts, the places where my certainties collapsed and rebuilt into something different, they have not always been invited to see that person. I did not always invite them. And so they love a version of me that is real but incomplete. And the distance between the version and the person is where the loneliness lives. This is nobody's fault. It is the inevitable consequence of long relationships where the growing happens privately. The remedy, I know this now, is to share the growing as it happens, to invite the people you love into the process, not just the result. I learned that too late for most of my relationships. I am telling it to you now. Layer 6. The loneliness of never having said the real thing. The conversation that was always going to happen someday. The sixth layer is the hardest to say, and I want to say it carefully because it is the one that I think costs people the most. There is a specific loneliness that comes from being in relationships, long, loving, genuinely close relationships, where the real conversation has never happened. Not the practical conversations, not the surface conversations, the real one. The one where you say what you actually think about your life, what you are afraid of, what you regret, what you believed and stopped believing, what you want that you have never admitted wanting, what you feel about the way you have spent your years, the conversation that would require you to be genuinely, uncomfortably, unguardedly honest with another human being who knows your name. Most people never have this conversation with anyone. They approximate it, in therapy occasionally, in the particular intimacy of 3 a.m. with someone they trust. But the full version, with the people they actually love and live alongside, almost never. Because the stakes are too high and the habit of protection is too old and the right moment never seems to arrive. I am 88 years old. I have had that conversation, the full, real, unguarded version, with exactly 2 people in my entire life, my wife once. Near the end of her life, when the proximity of loss made pretense feel like waste, and a man I met at 74, a stranger on a train, who asked me one question and then simply waited while I answered it, fully, for the first time in my life. The stranger on the train knew me more completely in 4 hours than most of the people who loved me knew me in 40 years. Not because he was more perceptive, because he had no image of me to protect, no history to maintain, no relationship to manage. He was simply present, simply curious, and the absence of stakes made the truth possible. I have thought about that train journey more times than I can count. Section 3. Why we build the walls. I want to answer the question I think you are probably asking. Why? Why do we build these walls between ourselves and the people who love us? Why do we spend decades being carefully known, precisely known, selectively known, when what we want, at the deepest level, is to be actually known? I have thought about this for a long time, and here is the honest answer. Because being fully known requires accepting the possibility of being fully rejected. And that possibility, the possibility that if they saw all of it, the unedited and unpolished and uncertain version, they might love you less, is too terrifying to risk with someone whose love you cannot afford to lose. So we take the risk with strangers, with therapists, with journals, with the person on the train, with anyone whose verdict doesn't threaten the structure of our life, and we protect the people we love most from the parts of us that feel most precarious, because protecting them feels like protecting the relationship. It isn't. Protecting them from your real self protects you from the relationship. The wall you build to keep the love safe is the same wall that keeps you alone inside it. Safety and intimacy are, at their deepest level, in permanent tension. You cannot have both fully. Every person who has ever loved another person has had to decide again and again how much safety they are willing to trade for how much truth. I traded too much safety for too long, and arrived at 70 surrounded by love and sitting alone inside it. Section 4. What actually changes this? I want to tell you what I found changed this, not in theory, in practice, in my own life, late in it. Because the answer is not what I expected. I expected the answer to be about vulnerability. I had read the books, I knew the framework: open up, share more, be willing to be seen. I tried it, it helped. It was not the whole answer. The thing that actually changed the loneliness, the thing that moved it, was not sharing more of myself. It was becoming genuinely, practically curious about the other person. When I stopped managing how I was known and started being truly curious about who the people I loved actually were, underneath their own performances, their own curated selves, their own careful presentations, something shifted. Because curiosity is an invitation. When you ask a real question and wait for the real answer, you signal that the real answer is safe with you, and that signal, given consistently, begins to close the distance, not immediately, not in a single conversation, over time, over repeated genuine questions that assume the person might surprise you, over the consistent presence of someone who is interested in the becoming, not just the already known. I became that person finally in my late 70s. Too late for some relationships, not too late for all of them. My son and I in the last several years have become genuinely curious about each other. It is the closest we have ever been. He is 56 years old. I am 88. It took us 30 years to find our way to each other. It is not too late. That is what I want you to hear underneath everything else I have said today. The loneliness that lives inside love is not a life sentence. It is a condition that changes the moment one person in the relationship decides to trade a measure of safety for a measure of truth. One person, one question, one genuine waiting for the real answer. That is the entire mechanism. It is simpler than we make it. It is harder than it sounds. It is possible at any age. I'm 88 years old. I have been loved generously and continuously for most of my life, and I have spent a significant portion of that life quietly lonely inside that love. Not because the love was insufficient, because I was. Insufficient at the particular kind of courage that real connection requires, the courage to be seen without editing, to be known without curation, to ask the question that assumed the person might still surprise you, to let the relationship be something other than a managed performance of closeness. I learned these things slowly, later than I should have. I am still learning them. At 88, I am still, in small ways, in the relationships I have left, trying to trade a little more safety for a little more truth. I don't know how much time I have to get this right. I know I am going to keep trying. Because the loneliness of being unloved is a wound that comes from the outside. The loneliness of being loved but unseen, that one we built ourselves. And what we built, we can begin to unbuild, even now, even late, even imperfectly, even one real question at a time, very quiet, almost to yourself. Then directly into the lens for the comment trap. Is there someone in your life, someone who loves you, someone you love, who doesn't actually know you? And do you know why you haven't let them?